Atlanta, Georgia. It all started one night when Emily decided to go to a contemporary art exhibition in downtown Atlanta. She had always been drawn to art. It was something personal, a way to find peace amidst the chaos of her privileged life. After a few intense months of preparing new projects for the family foundation, she wanted to take a break from the routine. It was there, among the paintings and sculptures, that she first saw Jaden. He wasn't there as a visitor. Jaden was working part-time at the gallery, helping with the organization. At first glance, he didn't seem to fit into the space. His easy confidence and spontaneity contrasted with the prim audience that had gathered there. But that was exactly what attracted Emily. Their eyes met as he handed a glass of champagne to a visitor, and she looked at an abstract sculpture. "Do you know how to decipher these abstractions?" Jaden joked as he came closer to her. His voice was warm and a little playful. Emily smiled. "Maybe." "Do you know how to open champagne without splashing?" she replied in the same tone. Her answer struck a chord with him. She wasn't the type of girl to flirt easily. It was just a light conversation, but it immediately sparked a spark. They continued to talk, moving from discussing art to personal topics. Emily admitted that she comes from an influential family, but dreams of simpler things in life. Jaden, on the other hand, said that he grew up in a working-class family and always wanted more than what his neighborhood had to offer. "I never thought I'd meet someone at an art show who didn't like art," Emily joked again. "And I didn't think I'd meet someone who wasn't afraid to be themselves," Jaden replied. They exchanged numbers, and from that moment on, a story began that changed their lives. They met in various cafes, on walks in parks, and even at small street fairs. Jaden was attentive and kind, although his past sometimes seemed like a shadow that followed him. He tried to hide this part of himself, not wanting it to harm their relationship. Emily admired his way of looking at life. Even without a lot of money or connections, he found joy in the little things. With each date, she fell deeper in love, confident that she had finally found someone with whom she was ready to share her life. However, Jaden always remained a bit distant. He never talked about his past in detail, only hinting that he had made some mistakes in his life that he regretted. One night, after a few months of dating, he confessed to her that he had been in a serious relationship in the past that ended painfully. It was his way of explaining why he sometimes behaved cautiously and was not in a hurry to reveal all his emotions. "I don't want to hurt you, Emily," he said that evening, holding her hand. Emily decided then that she should give him time. She believed that his feelings were genuine and that they would overcome any difficulties together. Their relationship seemed sincere and strong, but deep down inside, Jaden had always hidden a part of himself that Emily had not touched. And although she noticed it, she attributed it to his past experiences and his desire to protect himself from new pain. Then he proposed to her, and she accepted. Atlanta was coming alive in the warm autumn sun as bride Emily Carter completed the final preparations for her wedding. Her wedding to Jaden Williams was planned as a lavish celebration of love and unity. Emily grew up in a privileged family, but she was always drawn to people with ordinary dreams, like Jaden. He was a real star, young, handsome, confident, with a charming smile that attracted the attention of everyone around him. Emily paced the spacious hotel room, checking the last details. Her pale blue rehearsal dress looked perfect. Every movement was filled with excitement and anticipation of a new life. She had been dreaming about this day since she was a little girl, imagining how everything would be perfect. But something elusive hung in the air, an anxiety she couldn't explain. On the other side of the room, her mother, Sarah Carter, sipped her champagne leisurely, watching her daughter with squinted eyes. Sarah was the kind of woman who always got what she wanted. Her beauty was never questioned, and her ability to manipulate others had been honed over the years. And although Emily knew that her mother had a strong character, sometimes it seemed that she was hiding something more. "Jaden is a treasure, Emily," Sarah said, inhaling the aroma of her drink. "But are you sure he's for you?" "Mom, come on. We've already talked about this," Emily replied sharply, trying to ignore her mother's constant doubts. Sarah just smiled and took another sip. Her curious gaze lingered on her own reflection in the mirror, and then on the gift on the table. It was a pair of luxurious gold-embellished cufflinks she had bought for Jaden. She ran her finger lightly over the smooth surface of the box, as if thinking about something important. You know, honey, men like Jaden love women who understand their passion for life. Emily felt indignation flare up in her chest, but decided not to provoke a conflict. Her father had long since left the family, and she didn't want to fight with her mother on this important day. Later in the evening, during the pre-wedding party, many guests gathered. The atmosphere was filled with joy, laughter, and the clinking of glasses. Jaden, in his elegant suit, mingled among the guests, greeting acquaintances and hugging friends. His best friend, Marcus Johnson, was by his side, watching him with a careful eye. "Something wrong, bro?" Jaden asked, raising an eyebrow. "You know I don't trust Sarah," Marcus replied quietly. "She's dangerous. She's just Emily's mother," Jaden said, trying not to give his friend's words any weight. But deep down, he knew that there was something between him and Sarah that no one else should know. At the party, Sarah and Jaden shared a few glances that seemed too intimate. One of the waiters passing by noticed this strange chemistry between them, although he didn't say anything. "I see you got my gift," Sarah whispered when they met alone in the hallway. She ran her finger up Jaden's sleeve where one of the cufflinks shone. "Yeah, they look great," he replied with a small smile. "Keep them. It's a symbol that I'll always be there for you, even if others don't see it," she added quietly, and left him standing in the hallway, disappearing into the crowd of guests. Emily spent time with her friends, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was slipping out of control. She decided to find Jaden to spend time together before the big day. When she approached him, however, he was in conversation with her mother. Their gaze seemed to hide something more than a simple conversation. "Jaden, can I talk to you for a minute?" Emily asked softly. He immediately broke away from the conversation and joined her, but Sarah remained where she was with a subtle smile on her lips. Emily tried to push the unpleasant thoughts out of her mind, but the feeling of anxiety only increased. As the party was coming to an end, Marcus approached Jaden once more. "Do you know what you're doing?" he asked quietly. "I've got it under control," Jaden replied, though his voice was not as confident as usual. Meanwhile, the waiter who had noticed Jaden and Sarah's meeting saw something else. He noticed that the cufflink on Jaden's sleeve had disappeared after the conversation with Sarah. It looked strange, but he decided it was none of his business. The hotel where the wedding rehearsal was to take place was filled with guests laughing, drinking champagne, and sharing life stories. The atmosphere was festive, but for some of the guests, it hid a growing tension. Jaden tried to remain confident, but his demeanor showed signs of anxiety. The glances he exchanged with Sarah Carter were not lost on the attentive eyes. The guests noticed these moments, but no one could guess what kind of hurricane was hiding behind those looks. Emily tried to focus on the pleasant moments. After all, tomorrow would be the most important day of her life. She spent the whole day among her friends, discussing jewelry, dress, and ceremony details. But from time to time, she found herself thinking that Jaden looked too focused, even distant. It bothered her, although she tried not to make a big deal of it. "He's just nervous," Emily told herself. Weddings are a big responsibility. She didn't know that the reason for his behavior was something else entirely. Later that evening, the rehearsal went off without a hitch. Jaden stood next to Emily, returning her smiles, but he could feel every minute bringing more and more tension. At one point, when everyone went to break, Sarah came up to him. "Are you really going to marry her?" Sarah asked, looking at him as if she could see right through him. "It's not up for discussion," he replied stiffly, trying to keep his distance. "Do you really think you can live with Emily knowing that you and I—" Sarah leaned in closer without finishing, leaving the sentence hanging in the air. Jaden gritted his teeth, feeling his emotions boiling inside him. He could feel this woman's grip on him, and he didn't know how to break it. "If you break this, it will end badly," he whispered. Sarah just smiled. Marcus Johnson, who had been watching the whole evening, couldn't stand idly by. He had known Jaden for a long time and could see that he was confused about his own decisions. Marcus walked up to Jaden when he came back inside and looked him straight in the eye. "What's going on with you and Sarah?" Marcus asked quietly but firmly. It's not what you think, Jaden muttered, avoiding his friend's gaze. You're making a huge mistake, bro. This could ruin your life. Stay out of this, Marcus, Jaden replied sharply. But both Marcus and Jaden knew that was a lie. Control had been lost long ago. Meanwhile, Emily began to sense that something was going wrong. She had noticed her mother and Jaden disappear for a while, and though she tried to ignore it, anxiety began to build inside her. She went up to the terrace, hoping to find them and dispel her doubts. But when she stepped outside, she saw only her mother, calmly fixing her hair and smiling back at her guests. "Mom?" Emily asked in surprise. "What are you doing out here?" "Just getting some fresh air, honey," Sarah replied with the same smile. "Jaden is here. He loves you very much." Emily nodded, but she couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that something was hiding behind those words, something important. Closer to midnight, when the guests began to leave, Jaden and Sarah crossed paths alone again. "We both know what you're going to do, Jaden," Sarah said, slowly running her hand over his shoulder, "and you can't avoid it." That was the moment he realized the game was over. He stood on the brink of an abyss, and the choice he made would change everything. But whatever he chose, tomorrow it would all end, in one way or another. The day came that was to be the happiest of Emily's life. The sun's rays were streaming through the light curtains of the hotel where she was putting on her wedding dress. Her heart was beating faster than usual, but she didn't know if it was because of excitement or because of the feeling of an invisible threat hanging in the air. All the guests had already gathered in the hotel garden. Her fiancé, Jaden, looked confident as he stood at the altar in his elegant tuxedo. There was a festive atmosphere around them as friends laughed, photographers snapped pictures, and musicians tuned their instruments. But Emily had a strange feeling that this day would bring her not joy, but destruction. "Emily, are you ready?" her friend Anna asked, adjusting the veil on her shoulders. "Yes," Emily answered, although her voice sounded a little uncertain. When everyone left for the ceremony, Emily was left alone for a few minutes. She decided to take a walk around the hotel to collect her thoughts. Her feet led her in the direction of the room where she knew Jaden was staying. She didn't want to see him before the ceremony, but she instinctively felt she had to check on him. As she approached his room, she suddenly heard muffled laughter and a familiar voice. It was the voice of her mother, Sarah. Puzzled, Emily cautiously opened the door, which was ajar, and what she saw inside shocked her to the core. Sarah and Jaden were in the room together. He was sitting on the edge of the bed without his jacket on, and her mother was standing over him, running her hand over his shoulder, their faces too close. Their body language was too intimate for people just talking. Emily froze in place. Her head spun, and her heart seemed to stop for a moment. "What are you doing here?" she whispered, even though she knew that what she had seen was unjustifiable. Jaden and Sarah flinched. He quickly pulled away from her, but it was too late. Their guilt was already on the surface. "It's not what you think," Jaden said quickly, trying to calm her down. "How could you, Mom?" Emily's voice broke. "How could you both?" On my day, Sarah just shrugged with a small smile. "Honey, you're being naive. It was inevitable," she replied coldly. Emily couldn't believe what she was hearing. Her mother, her own fiancé. It was a betrayal she could not bear. Emily returned to the ceremony with a broken heart. Her guests were waiting for her, but she was not ready to continue. Her hands were shaking and her breathing was ragged. As she walked up the aisle, she felt everything inside her boiling with anger and despair. "I can't do this," she exclaimed, stopping in the middle of the ceremony. The guests stared in amazement, and whispers began to spread through the crowd. "This wedding is not going to happen," Emily said in a sharp voice. "Do you know why? Because my fiancé and my mother betrayed me right here today." The guests gasped, and the ceremony instantly turned into chaos. People started looking at each other and whispering to each other. Marcus tried to calm Jaden down, but it was too late. Everyone realized what had happened, and the crowd began to disperse. Sarah stepped forward, but instead of apologizing or explaining, she shrugged her shoulders. "I'm sorry, honey, but that's life," she said coldly. Emily couldn't take it anymore. She took off her veil, threw it on the floor, and ran away, leaving everyone in shock and despair. The scandal at the wedding remained the main topic for all the guests. The atmosphere in the hotel was tense. Jaden and Sarah tried to avoid each other, but their actions had already caused irreparable damage. Emily locked herself in her room and didn't want to talk to anyone, but something else was to happen that night. Around midnight, someone entered Sarah's room. Her face was distorted with surprise when she saw the visitor enter the room. They had a tense conversation that quickly escalated into a fight. Hatred and resentment hung in the air, accumulating throughout the day. And then it all happened. The knife blade glinted in the dim light, and a scream cut through the night silence of the hotel. The stabbing was precise and deadly, and Sarah's body fell to the floor, her eyes wide with shock. The morning brought a terrible discovery. Hotel staff discovered Sarah Carter's body in her room. Police immediately arrived at the scene and began investigating. Investigators found the knife used in the murder, but the fingerprints on it were smeared off. Detective Rachel Scott, who arrived at the crime scene, cautiously examined the room. Her keen eyes settled on an important detail. One of Sarah's sleeves was missing a cufflink that had previously belonged to Jaden. This seemed suspicious, and she made a note of it. "Interview everyone who was at the wedding," she ordered her partner. "Everyone knows something." Thus, a holiday that was supposed to unite families ended in scandal and murder. Now the detectives have to unravel this tangle of lies, betrayal, and passion to find the killer. Who committed this terrible crime? And what other secrets are the wedding guests hiding? The investigation is just beginning. The sun had not yet fully risen over Atlanta when a group of detectives arrived at the hotel. Rachel Scott, an experienced detective with impeccable intuition, walked in front. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail, and her eyes were cold and attentive, scanning the scene, taking in every detail. The hotel was cordoned off with ribbons that read, "Police and forensic scientists were working at the scene." Sarah Carter's body lay in her room, on the floor next to the bed. Her pale skin contrasted with the red bloodstains on the gorgeous white dress she had worn to her daughter's wedding. Rachel leaned over the body, examining the stab wound on her chest. The murder looked quick and ruthless, one precise stab. Everyone who had anything to do with this event was now a suspect. "We need to find out who was the last person to see her alive," she told her partner, Detective John Reeves. John, young but diligent, nodded and immediately set out to collect statements from hotel employees. The first thing the detectives did was interview the hotel staff. One of the waiters said that the night after the wedding, he saw Sarah Carter alone with Jaden Williams in the room. "They looked very close," he said, blushing slightly. "But then they got into a fight. I heard Sarah screaming, 'You're not leaving me, never!' And then the door slammed shut." Rachel wrote down these words. The conflict between Sarah and Jaden confirmed that they had a personal score to settle. But this was not enough to draw conclusions. Emily Carter was the next to testify. She was emotionally broken, with eyes reddened with tears. "I saw them together," she whispered, almost unable to get the words out. "My mother and Jaden. I couldn't believe it. I ran away. And then everything fell apart." "Did you leave your room after the ceremony was over?" Rachel asked, focusing on the details. "I was in my room. I didn't even know that someone had killed her. If I had known—" Rachel noticed that despite her pain and despair, Emily did not show any joy or relief at her mother's death. This indicated that, although she had a motive, she was unlikely to be a killer. Next in line was a conversation with Jaden Williams, who looked disturbed but tried to remain confident. "It was a mistake," he admitted. I shouldn't have been with her, but it happened, and I had no choice but to tell Emily the truth." "What happened after you talked to Sarah?" Rachel asked, looking him intently in the eye. "She threatened to ruin my life if I left her, but I haven't seen her since she left. I swear." Rachel noticed that he looked nervous, but his words seemed to be true. But one detail bothered her. Jaden's left sleeve was missing a cufflink. "Where's your cufflink, Jaden?" she asked, narrowing her eyes suspiciously. "I must have lost it during the party." He shrugged, but this answer only reinforced the detective's suspicions. The last person to be interviewed was Marcus Johnson, Jaden's best friend. He seemed calm, but his answers were too cautious. I knew something was going on between Jaden and Sarah, he admitted. I warned him to stay away from her. Where were you that night? Rachel asked. In my room. I have an alibi. The hotel staff can confirm it. The alibi seemed credible, but Rachel noticed that he avoided direct eye contact. His behavior indicated that he was hiding something, but what was he hiding? The detectives gathered several possible motives. 1. Jaden had a motive to get rid of Sarah to free himself from her manipulations. 2. Emily could have killed her mother because of her infidelity, although her alibi seemed convincing. 3. Marcus could have killed Sarah to protect a friend or because of his own hidden feelings for Emily. Each of them had reasons for hatred and betrayal, but the evidence was still lacking. Later that day, forensics found a missing cufflink under the bed in Sarah's room. There were traces of blood on it, but what was interesting was that the prints on the cufflink belonged not only to Jaden, but also to... How could Emily's fingerprints be on that cufflink? Rachel wondered. Rachel realized Emily could have touched the cufflink by accident when she saw her mother and her fiancé together. But that didn't mean she had killed Sarah. The cufflink was just a piece of a puzzle that hadn't been completed yet. Rachel stood in the room, looking at the crime scene. She felt that the truth was close, but something important was eluding her. A small detail that she hadn't noticed yet could change the course of the entire investigation. Whoever it was, she thought, did everything possible to hide their crime, but we will find him, and he will pay for it. All that remained was to put together all the pieces of this complex puzzle, and the truth would surely come to light. The following days were filled with thorough police work. Rachel Scott and her team checked every clue, looking for answers among the many small details. All of the suspects' alibis needed to be checked, and forensic experts were already sending back the results of their tests. But the most important thing was that the suspicions were increasingly concentrated on one person, Emily Carter. A cufflink with her fingerprints on it, a personal conflict with her mother, and strong emotions at the wedding made her the prime suspect. Rachel invited Emily in for a second interview. She sat across from the detective, looking exhausted, but her words remained calm. I didn't kill my mother, she said firmly, her hands on the table. Yes, I saw them together, but after that I locked myself in my room. Your fingerprints were found on a cufflink that was found under the bed in your mother's room. Rachel said. It looks like you were there. I saw the cufflink when I came across them in the room, Emily replied. Rachel watched the girl's reaction closely. Although Emily's testimony sounded convincing, her emotional state and lack of an alibi left room for doubt. Meanwhile, Jaden Williams reinforced his suspicions against Emily. He claimed that she had been under deep stress after seeing him with her mother. She was not herself, he said. I thought she might have done something terrible without realizing what she was doing. This testimony made things even more complicated for Emily. Her motives and behavior seemed logical, and all the evidence began to fit together. But something about it didn't sit right with Rachel. The details seemed to fit too perfectly, like a puzzle that someone had put together on purpose. Suddenly, a new clue emerged in the investigation. One of the hotel employees who remembered hearing an argument between Jaden and Sarah decided to share another important detail. I saw Jaden leave your mother's room that night, he said. He looked very angry, and his cufflink was no longer on his shirt sleeve. This information made Rachel doubt Jaden's alibi. If he was the last person to see Sarah alive, why was his testimony so different from reality? And why was he trying so hard to convince everyone of Emily's guilt? Rachel Scott invited Jaden to the last interrogation. Your version of events raises a lot of questions, Jaden, Rachel began. You said that after you and Sarah had a fight, you went to your room, but one of the witnesses saw you outside Sarah's room shortly before she died. That's not true. Jaden turned pale but tried to remain calm. I couldn't have done it, he mumbled. It was Emily. The cufflink found in the room had not only her fingerprints on it, but yours as well, Rachel replied coldly. She accidentally touched the cufflink, but you left it there, and it was you who killed Sarah. Jaden couldn't hold back any longer. She blackmailed me, he whispered, not looking up. She said if I left her, she would ruin my life and my marriage to Emily. I couldn't let that happen. Everything was out of control. His voice trailed off as he realized he had confessed to murder. All the small details now fit together. 1. The cufflink pointed to the scene of the conflict and Jaden's involvement. 2. The testimony of the hotel employee confirmed his presence near Sarah's room. 3. The blackmail motive explained why Jaden committed the murder. Jaden tried to keep his secret by shifting the blame to Emily, but Rachel Scott's small details and attentiveness revealed the truth. He no longer resisted when he was taken into custody. After Jaden Williams's arrest, the investigation continued for several more months. The indictment was built on solid evidence. The cufflink, witness testimony, and his own confession killed any chance of acquittal. Prosecutors charged him with aggravated first-degree premeditated murder because his motive was to avoid blackmail and to preserve his reputation and future with Emily. The trial attracted a lot of media attention. The tragedy that happened during the wedding affected many people and caused a lot of controversy. Jaden looked broken and depressed during the court hearings. His lawyers tried to get the sentence reduced, arguing that the murder was committed in a state of passion. However, prosecutors emphasized that he had deliberately entered Sarah's room with a knife and had also deliberately tried to shift the blame to Emily to avoid punishment. On the day of his sentencing, Jaden stood before the judge with his head down, knowing that his fate had already been sealed. The defendant is found guilty of murder in the first degree, the judge announced. The judge added that given the gravity of the crime and the attempts to shift the blame to another person, there would be no mitigation. Jaden accepted his sentence in silence, knowing that it was over. His once bright future was now gone behind bars. After the trial ended, Emily Carter tried to pick up the pieces of her life. What she had experienced was devastating: her fiancé's betrayal, her mother's murder, interrogations, and the constant pressure of suspicion. But instead of wallowing in her grief, she decided to fight for a new beginning. In the first months after the verdict, Jaden Williams was in a state of deep apathy. He knew that most of his former friends and acquaintances had turned their backs on him. Prison became a cold and hopeless reality for him, where every day seemed to drag on like an eternity. At first, he expected someone to visit him. However, Emily Carter, whom he had once cheated and betrayed, never came. Marcus Johnson, his friend, didn't show up either. Jaden was left alone with his conscience and thoughts about how things had gone wrong. A few months after the sentencing, Jaden finally had a visitor. It was Emily. Her visit came as a surprise to him, and a spark of hope flashed in his soul. Perhaps she had come to forgive him, or at least to listen to him. When Jaden was brought to the visitor's room, he saw her sitting at a table. She looked calm, but her face showed a mixture of disappointment and inner strength. This was not the girl he knew. Emily had changed. She was no longer naive and vulnerable. Here was a person who had experienced betrayal, loss, and managed to get back up. "Hi," Jaden said quietly, sitting down across from her. "Hi," she replied coldly, without emotion. For a moment, there was silence between them. Jaden sighed, trying to find the right words. "I'm glad you came. I'd like to explain everything." Emily held up a hand to stop him. "I didn't come to hear your excuses, Jaden. I'm here to tell you that you don't exist for me anymore." Her voice was even, but she sounded determined. "What you did destroyed not only my life, but yours as well. And you have to live with that." Jaden was silent, knowing that nothing he said could change the past. He wanted to apologize, but he knew it wouldn't change anything. Emily stood up, preparing to leave. "Goodbye, Jaden. I'm not coming back. Live with what's left of your life." She turned and walked out, leaving him sitting at the empty table. Her words sounded like a final sentence that ended their story forever. After visiting Jaden, she felt relieved. At first it was hard, nights filled with nightmares. Memories of that fateful day and a feeling of emptiness haunted her. She underwent psychotherapy to help her regain her balance. Her friends and family who stayed by her side supported her, but she knew that only she could rebuild her life. Emily moved to another city to start from scratch. She decided to take up art and opened a small art gallery where she exhibited the works of young artists. It was something more than just a business. It became a new meaning for her, an opportunity to recover through art. Over time, she learned to forgive, not to forget, but to free herself from the burden of the past. She realized that she couldn't live in the past and let Jaden's crime ruin her future. Several years passed. Emily was no longer the naive girl who once believed in a perfect wedding. She had grown stronger and wiser. Since she left the past behind, her life took on a different meaning. She wasn't looking for a new relationship, but she didn't rule out the possibility that she would someday find someone who would share her happiness without lies and betrayal. As she stood in her gallery, looking at the new exhibition, Emily felt that she had finally freed herself from the shadow of that fateful day. Her life was no longer defined by betrayal or loss. She had found herself and finally felt she could move on. The past had left its mark, but it no longer controlled her future. Jaden spent his days in prison alone. He tried to make sense of his new existence, but it was getting harder every day. The only visitors he had were prison chaplains and volunteers who brought books or tried to support him spiritually. But Jaden knew that this was only a poor substitute for the real human connection he no longer had and would likely never have. His story was a lesson in the consequences of betrayal, deception, and greed. Although he had many years to live behind bars, he knew he would remain forgotten by those who had once mattered to him.